Have you ever heard or learned about the civil rights influencer Thurgood Marshall? Marshall was the first to break the racial barrier by being the first to serve for the U.S. Supreme Court. He made a huge impact on the civil rights movement, and not all is told directly how it happened. So I, Bianca Gomez, will be presenting how Thurgood Marshall embarked on his journey to become the first African American judge for the U.S. Supreme Court. You may wonder, who was Thurgood Marshall and how was he an influencer? Well, Thurgood Marshall was the first African American Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States from 1967 all the way through 1992. He was a counsel to the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, also known as the NAACP. From there on, he also won an argument against the Brown v. Board of Education case in 1954, declaring that not all schools were equal. This ended racial segregation in public schools. As commonly known, on July 2, 1908, William and Norma Marshall welcomed their baby boy, Thurgood Marshall. Marshall was born and raised in Baltimore, Maryland, with his older brother, William. While growing up with his two parents that both had a good job, they hoped the best for Thurgood as well as for his brother. His mother, a teacher, and his father that worked at a country club, both persuaded their kids to become either a doctor or a lawyer. And although this was hoped for, it didn't start off easy when Marshall would hang out with the tough kids. Eventually, Marshall grew out of the tough kid phase and focused more as to what his parents said. Marshall also credited his father for him discussing Constitution with him and leading him into that direction to becoming a judge. Marshall went to Frederick Douglass High School all the way up to the year 1925, where he graduated a year early with a B average. He then went to Lincoln University, graduating with honors, and after so, he made his next move on to Howard University after being rejected by the University of Maryland due to his race. After graduating from Howard University, he started his legal career as counsel to the Baltimore branch for the NAACP. He and the NAACP organization created the Defense of Education Law in 1940, but was later signed into a law on September 2, 1958. From there on, he continued fighting cases such as the Brown v. Board of Education in 1954 to being appointed by the President John F. Kennedy in 1961. While focusing on his career to become a judge, he met his first soon-to-be wife, Vivian Bury. In 1929, they made it official and married. As years went by, 1955 came and they divorced. In the same year of 1955, Marshall married his new wife, Cecilia Suyat. This marriage lasted until time came and he passed. On August 12, 1956, Cecilia and Thurgood welcomed their first boy, Thurgood Marshall Jr., and then 2 years later, on July 6, 1958, they welcomed their second boy, John Marshall. In the early years of Marshall's life, his first encounter that was almost in the way of his goal to becoming a judge was when he was denied to his college due to his race. As a lesson from this, he carried it throughout his life as determination to get where he wanted to be. With other obstacles coming at him, for example, not only was being African American already harder for him back in the Civil Rights Movement days, but he wasn't accepted by all the people for him to be a part of the Supreme Court. At the end of the day, he conquered through this all. Not only was one of Marshall's achievements was being the first African American justice, but he broke the Jim Crow segregation laws by doing so. That didn't end there, because in 1946 he was awarded the annual Spingarn Medal by the NAACP. 46 years later, in 1993, he was recognized because of how much respect he earned and was awarded Presidential Medal of Freedom. At the age of 82, Marshall announces his retirement. After 25 years of serving on the bench for the Supreme Court, he retired in 1991 due to health issues. Sadly, time came, and on January 24, 1993, Marshall died of heart failure. He was pronounced dead at the age of 84 at the Bethesda Naval Medical Center in Maryland at 2 p.m. Marshall left behind his 2 sons and wife. Until this day, Marshall is remembered not only as an influencer, but an important person that took part in a time of crisis that needed to be stopped. In honor of his remembrance, there is a model statue of him that stands at the Maryland State House in Baltimore. If that couldn't be memorable enough, he left behind an inspiring quote that states, "Sometimes history takes things into its own hands." And he is indeed correct. Overall, if you still do not understand by this point why Thurgood Marshall is important to the civil rights movements, then I don't know what more to say than to just go over the basics he did for the states. Important fact number 1. He was a leader that was part of the struggle to end inequality. Secondly, he ended public school segregation. Last but foremost not least, he ended the Jim Crow segregation by being the first African American to be an Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court.